The hospital hallway buzzed with its usual chaos. Nurses rushing by with clipboards, doctors murmuring in hushed tones, and the occasional wail of a newborn echoing from the maternity ward. But in the midst of it all, there was one person who seemed invisible. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Carter, and she had just started her first day at St. Vincent's General Hospital. Dressed in simple scrubs and carrying a worn-out stethoscope, she blended into the background like just another face in the crowd. No one gave her a second glance. No one, that is, except for the janitor who held the elevator door open for her, with a polite nod. But even he didn't know who she really was. Evelyn had a secret, one that would soon turn the entire hospital upside down. For weeks, the staff had been buzzing about the arrival of their new chief of medicine. Rumors swirled about who it could be. A renowned surgeon from Johns Hopkins, a brilliant researcher from Harvard, or maybe even a celebrity doctor with a TV show. But no one expected it to be her. The woman they'd ignored in the cafeteria, the one they'd brushed past in the hallways, the one they'd mistaken for a new intern. Evelyn had been observing everything. The way the nurses gossiped at the front desk, the way the senior doctors dismissed younger staff, the way the hospital seemed to run on a hierarchy of egos rather than compassion. And she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to reveal her true identity just yet, not until she'd seen the hospital for what it really was. The tension began to build on her third day. Dr. Marcus Hale, the current acting chief of medicine, was holding a staff meeting. In the conference room, Evelyn sat quietly in the back, taking notes as he droned on about budget cuts and efficiency. His tone was dismissive, his words laced with arrogance. When a young resident timidly raised a question about patient care, Marcus cut him off mid-sentence. "We don't have time for idealism," he snapped. "This is a hospital, not a charity." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. She was biding her time. Later that afternoon, she found herself in the ER, assisting with a critical case. A young boy had been rushed in after a car accident, and the team was struggling to stabilize him. Evelyn stepped in without hesitation, her calm demeanor and quick thinking saving the boy's life. But when the attending physician, Dr. Laura Bennett, realized who had taken charge, she didn't thank Evelyn. Instead, she glared at her. "Who do you think you are?" Laura hissed. "You don't get to waltz in here and play hero." Evelyn simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She was used to being underestimated, but she also knew that her time in the shadows was running out. The breaking point came during a high-stakes surgery. A prominent local politician had been admitted with a life-threatening condition, and the pressure was on to save him. Dr. Hale was leading the procedure, but things weren't going well. The patient's vitals were crashing, and the team was on the verge of panic. That's when Evelyn stepped forward. "Let me take over," she said, her voice steady but firm. Marcus froze, his scalpel hovering mid-air. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded, echoing Laura's words from earlier. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes blazing with a quiet intensity. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter," she said. "Your new chief of medicine." The room fell silent. The heart monitor beeped ominously in the background, a stark reminder of the life hanging in the balance. Marcus stared at her, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The nurses exchanged nervous glances, and even Laura looked stunned. Evelyn didn't wait for a response. She took the scalpel from Marcus's hand and began issuing orders, her voice commanding but calm. The team hesitated for a moment, then sprang into action, following her lead. But as the surgery progressed, one question lingered in the air. What would happen next? How would the staff react to the woman they'd ignored, now standing at the helm of their hospital? And what would Evelyn do about the culture of arrogance and indifference she'd witnessed? As the final stitch was placed and the patient stabilized, Evelyn stepped back, her hands steady but her mind racing. She knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge wasn't saving lives. It was changing the hearts and minds of the people who were supposed to care for them. And as she looked around the room, at the faces of the staff who had underestimated her, she realized something. This was going to be a battle. A battle not just for the soul of the hospital, but for the very essence of what it meant to heal, and she was ready to fight. But the question remained, would they follow her? Or would they resist the change she was determined to bring? The mind tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever, and as the doors of the operating room swung open, the story was far from over. The operating room doors swung shut behind Evelyn as she stepped into the sterile hallway, the weight of the surgery still pressing on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, the faint scent of antiseptic filling her lungs. The hospital was quiet now, the late-night hum of activity reduced to a few scattered footsteps and the occasional beep of a monitor. But Evelyn knew the calm was deceptive. The storm was just beginning. As she walked toward the staff lounge, she couldn't help but replay the events of the past few days in her mind. She had come to St. Vincent's with a mission, not just to lead, but to transform. Years ago, she had trained here as a resident, and even then she had seen the cracks in the system, the favoritism, the egos, the way patient care often took a backseat to politics. She had vowed to one day return and make a difference. But now that she was here, the reality was more complicated than she had imagined. The staff's resistance to change was deeply ingrained, and her unassuming introduction had only made things harder. They didn't trust her. Not yet. In the lounge, a few nurses were huddled around a table, their voices low but animated. Evelyn caught snippets of their conversation as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Did you see her in there? She just took over like she owned the place," one of them whispered. "I heard she's been here for days just watching us. Creepy if you ask me," another added. Evelyn didn't react. She had expected this kind of talk. What she hadn't expected was the flicker of doubt in her own mind. Had she made the right choice by keeping her identity a secret? Or had she only made it harder for herself to earn their respect? She was about to leave when Dr. Laura Bennett walked in. The tension between them was immediate. Laura's eyes narrowed as she spotted Evelyn, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something. But instead she grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and turned to leave. Evelyn stopped her. "Dr. Bennett," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We need to talk." Laura hesitated, then crossed her arms. "About what?" she asked, her voice icy. "About what happened in the ER," Evelyn replied. "And about how we can work together to make sure it doesn't happen again." Laura's jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just waltz in here and start giving orders. This hospital has been running just fine without you." Evelyn met her gaze, unflinching. "Has it?" she asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're barely keeping it together. Patients are falling through the cracks. Morale is low, and the staff is more focused on politics than patient care. If that's your idea of just fine, then we have a bigger problem than I thought." Laura opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. Evelyn took a step closer, her voice softening. "I'm not here to take over, Laura. I'm here to help, but I can't do it alone. I need people like you, people who care about this hospital and the patients we serve. Will you work with me?" Laura stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. "I'll think about it," she muttered before walking out of the lounge. Evelyn sighed, running a hand through her hair. This was going to be harder than she had anticipated, but she couldn't afford to give up. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. She finished her coffee and headed back to her office, a small windowless room tucked away in a corner of the administrative wing. It was a far cry from the spacious, sunlit office she had left behind at her previous hospital, but she didn't mind. She wasn't here for the perks. As she sat down at her desk, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mentor, Dr. Samuel Grant, the man who had encouraged her to take this job. "How's it going?" the message read. Evelyn smiled faintly. Sam always had a way of checking in at just the right time. She typed out a quick reply. "It's complicated, but I'm hanging in there." She hesitated, then added, "Any advice?" A few moments later, her phone buzzed again. "Remember why you're there, and don't let them see you sweat." Evelyn chuckled softly. Sam always knew what to say, but as she put her phone down, her smile faded. She knew the real challenge was still ahead. The staff meeting tomorrow would be her first official appearance as chief of medicine, and she had no doubt it would be a disaster. Marcus Hale wasn't going to give up his power without a fight, and the rest of the staff would be watching closely to see how she handled it. She needed a plan, a way to win them over without alienating them further. As she sat there, lost in thought, a knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she called out. The door opened, and a young resident poked his head in. It was the same one Marcus had dismissed in the meeting earlier. "Dr. Carter?" he asked hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you for what you did in the ER today, and for standing up to Dr. Hale." Evelyn smiled, gesturing for him to come in. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ryan," he replied. "Ryan Patel." "Well, Ryan," Evelyn said, "you don't have to thank me, but I do need your help. I need to know what's really going on in this hospital. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Can you tell me?" Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "It's not easy," he admitted, "but I'll try." Over the next hour, he shared everything: the favoritism, the toxic culture, the way patients were often treated as numbers rather than people. Evelyn listened carefully, her heart sinking with each word. It was worse than she had thought. By the time Ryan left, Evelyn's mind was racing. She had a lot to think about, and even more to do. But one thing was clear: she couldn't do this alone. She needed allies, people who believed in her vision and were willing to fight for it. People like Ryan, and maybe, just maybe, people like Laura. But as she glanced at the clock and realized how late it was, she knew the real battle would begin tomorrow. The staff meeting loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, and Evelyn could only hope she was ready for whatever came next. As she gathered her things and headed for the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She turned, but the hallway was empty. Still, the sensation lingered, a reminder that not everyone in the hospital was on her side. Somewhere in the shadows, there were people who didn't want her to succeed, and they were waiting for her to make a mistake. Evelyn squared her shoulders and walked out into the night, determined not to give them the satisfaction. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder, what would it take to win this fight? And how far was she willing to go? The answers to those questions would shape not just her future, but the future of the entire hospital. And as the doors closed behind her, the tension in the air was thicker than ever. The story was far from over.